they give me this mic, who needs it, right? Got that 2 o'clock energy. I'm actually using it though because I think this is for the recording. But let's get started. We want to go on to the next section and keep you guys on track here today. So without further ado, we'll talk about another fun problem we're all dealing with. Not a break.
That's Rebecca, by the way. I'll introduce her.
I suppose I should
introduce
introduce ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm assuming I'm talking to people I know and stuff, and just assuming introductions aren't necessary. I'm Rebecca Dobbs Bush. My focus in the L&E group is within employee benefits a lot. I am also general employment law and litigation, but focusing on benefits specifically. Beverly?
That's very specific.
Good
Beverly Alfon, I go by Bev. I focus a lot on traditional labor, but also just as much on the typical employment issues. I think, soup to nuts, but always with the backup, except for the benefits. Boy, I always go to Rebecca. But thanks for joining us today.
All right. So let's get started with a dreary picture. Yay. You can't find people. There's less people that want to have. Just give me a signal in the back if I'm going out of the recording. That's my signal. I'm a pacer, so that's a problem. But maybe I'll look at my handout here. That might be a good idea, Rebecca. So we have the first few slides here just kind of showing that what we're telling you, in case you haven't gotten a sense of it already in your day-to-day HR duties, that this is the case. This is an older statistic, but still relevant. Record high vacancies in April. Some of you have seen these problems over the summer. You post jobs out there, you're just not getting the same number of applicants and volume that you're used to.
And that's across industries.
Across industries, everywhere. This was an article from the Society of Human Resource Management, May 26, 2021. Job openings reach record high, but where are the applicants? This one I find is an interesting statistic. Again, from the Wall Street Journal. This is a June 2nd, 2021 article. The economic recovery is here. It's unlike anything you've seen. Because remember, all the summers things started to pick back up, and summer. I mean, I'm from up in Wisconsin, for those of you that know, and we got tourist business up there, and it was a little hard to staff. So there was a lot of shortages up there by us, and that's a big hiring time that went with a lot of unmet needs. Typical job seekers per job opening, 5 per job to just 1.2 per job. That's crazy. I say that a lot, just a tip. That's crazy. This is a weird angle for me. I'm sorry, I apologize for just a different format for presenting. I think this statistic is also interesting one. Again, we're moving forward in time now, right? The trends haven't changed. This first article was April, May, June. Now we're looking at an August article, again, estimating 9.8 million job openings as of July, and 8.7 million considered unemployed.
I think the slide is particularly interesting because of the reasoning that they were able to draw out from the survey, which is that lots of people are not going back to work or they're leaving their jobs because they have a financial cushion. I mean, I thought the statistics used to be from Suze Orman, if you know her, the financial lady, people are not saving enough. So this is really a big question mark, right? So
they're skipping their lattes in the morning.
Right, are they skipping the lattes? Are they saving enough money on the commute and gas? Or is this tied to the unemployment benefit, right? The additional unemployment benefit. So I'm so curious to see if we start to see an uptick in applicants again now that the federal subsidy has stopped, right? Because that ended Labor Day weekend. We're still in September. I'm going to be curious to see where we go with that, but that was surprising to me, that reasoning.
Well, and there were other concerns as well. It wasn't just that, because obviously that unemployment subsidy only affects a subset of people in a certain income bracket, right? Some people are not motivated by that. They can make more working. But we had some childcare issues going on, school's not in session, the cost of childcare that was available was skyrocketing. the financial feasibility of returning to work. Just people's priorities had to naturally shift to adjust to the environment. And this one is now something we hear frequently about, the Great Resignation. Have you all heard this referred to in the news? So U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, 4 million people quit their jobs in July of 2021. The number of resignations and the number of people changing jobs has increased dramatically. And why this is, we could sit here and speculate all day, right? But I'm not one to say, who cares why? We got to deal with it. You only look at the why to know if it can help you retain your people. And so that's kind of what I want the focus to be in looking at this. A funny term, Bev and I were talking and preparing this presentation, and I sent her one of these articles. I was like, hee, look at these terms. So the highest rates among mid-career employees were age 30 to 45. Those were the people mostly switching jobs. And the article I was laughing at with Bev referred to them as either baby Gen Xers or geriatric millennials. Geriatric millennial. That's a great term.
I know. And,
hilarious. To refer to somebody in their 30s as geriatric is just a funny phrase. But the idea is that, think about it. We're in a situation where business is in high demand. There's a shortage of workers. So you don't necessarily want to invest in the new hire, the brand new entry-level employee, those nearing retirement that maybe put it off or were close to it, or like, I'm out of here now. I'm not messing with all of this. So the most attractive candidate is in that group, in that age range, because they're ready to go, right? They know how to work. They can be, in theory, self-sufficient, need less maintenance. And so now you have this, and possibly they were stable and waited until the pandemic slowed down to make sure it was a smart time to change jobs. So we just have this acceleration of people switching things around here.
Right, so they have the leverage, and now they also have changed expectations. I mean, that's the reality.
So in designing your recruiting retention strategies, I think all of that is important to keep in context, because who's your audience, right? If marketing sent me the email they sent us all the email with attendees and telling us who was coming, they said everybody speaks French, and I showed up and spoke English, that would be really stupid. You gotta know who you're trying to attract. And a lot of these things, we're gonna talk about, not everything is gonna fit your organization. The idea here is to brainstorm, as well as giving you some of the red flags to watch for if you're going down the road with any of these topics or options. Again, who are you trying to hire? Is this hourly blue-collar workers, or is this white-collar, college-educated professionals? Is it, younger, those geriatric millennials? Or are you looking at, Gen Zers or boomers or whoever? Like, what category of workers tend to attract to your job? What is your labor pool? Who is your audience? And we're going to go over each of these in detail in the next step.
Yeah, so the big question I've been finding, I should disclose, I'm the hiring partner for our firm, so I've been watching over the last 18 months the sort of conversations I've been having with candidates from entry level to mid to well into their career. And the questions, of course, almost always start with remote work. That's the big question. Are you allowing it? Are you being flexible? How has the company basically responded to the pandemic? And they'll leave it open-ended like that. Smart, right? All lawyers, so they're trying to bait me. But I think if you haven't already dealt with this question, it's something I don't think that's going to go, it's going to go away, right? If you haven't already. But the question also continues, because we all in mid-March of last year, the spring of last year, yes, a lot of companies, there was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. It was necessary. It was mandated in some circumstances where people were working remote. And then things start to get better. And then it's the question of, how do we get people back into the office? Are we going to stick with something that's temporary? Is this going to turn hybrid? Are we going to go fully remote like some of the big corporations? Those are the sort of questions that now you need to be prepared to discuss with those candidates when you are trying to recruit. So of course, and I know that this is probably something you've heard before, you can parse out who gets to work remotely and on what basis, right? Location, department, their position, but always remembering you have to keep that legitimate business reason, right? That legalese, that's gonna save you. That's going to hopefully put you in a better position down the road in case somebody says it's unfair because you are treating that group differently because they're mostly women, or you're treating that other group preferably because they're all men, right? Those kind of claims we're always trying to dodge, we're always trying to see on the horizon, but it is something that's doable. But just remember that remote work issue is still very much a hot issue.
And if you're dealing with it, you're not alone. I mean, the tech industry is famous for always starting up these trends, right? And then we're all stuck dealing with the expectations of them translating to every industry and every environment. And maybe some of you have seen that now Apple is suffering the consequences, and they're trying to bring people back in 3 days a week, and nobody wants to come, and people are quitting, and there's petitions, and everybody else is getting ready to poach their talent. And so you got to think about that at your, the same thing can happen in your organization when you have employees that really want it. I get that there are certain stubborn points and certain things when you can't allow it, but keep in mind, that could be a logical consequence then is you're going to lose that employee because there are so many options now that are allowing it and that you're competing with that, and that's kind of how the remote work environment has changed. Signing retentions, referrals, and perfect attendance bonuses. Have any of you started to implement anything like that? Hiring bonuses? Shy people, maybe one. I'll just assume it's me. Like, I don't want to be giving my stories as an example, so I'm not going to raise it too high here. I feel ya. I get it. I'm not going to call on you. But, we bring them up because, this is not rocket science, right? The concept of this, offering $500 signing bonus. Perfect attendance bonus. I mean, that's exactly what it sounds like, right? But what we want you to know is the red flags when you're structuring this and why you should be a little bit more careful. This notes in the second bullet point is that if it's a gift, it doesn't need to be included in the regular rate of pay. In a lot of cases, we see something like this with hourly workers, right? Like home healthcare workers, CNAs, restaurant workers, $500 signing bonus. It's people paid hourly is what we typically see. So what you have to remember is the federal rules and when it's required that bonus is then going to be determined as part of their regular rate. So when you're figuring out what overtime is, which is time and a half, you're calculating that value of the bonus accordingly. Oh, and also another fun note, watch out, because if you're doing it to a class of people and you're doing it wrong, guess what you have now? Class action. Yay. All this exciting news Bev and I are bringing you this afternoon. Yes. Thank you for that lovely transition, ma'am. The next slide is about when it has, a bonus is not a gift when there's a condition placed on it. Such as, in this example, a condition that the employee has to be employed at the time payments made, perform some sort of function, take certain action or refrain. Say you have a hiring bonus, but you have to be employed at least 3 months before it's paid out. Or if you're, how you can structure these and the forfeiture provisions depend on what state you're in. I'll just go to the next slide.
And if it's a signing bonus, that's just a gimme. Just because we just wanted you to say, yes, you're accepting our offer. In
no
those
conditions.
Cases, no condition, not taxable, not part of what is going to be at issue there.
People
So
don't
that's a
always
gift.
do that though, because they
Yeah.
don't want someone to then quit a week later after they get their check, right?
Right.
Yeah. It can. So a referral bonus
So
could
the
be.
question, because they can't.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Does this provision and condition? Thank you. She keeps me in line. See, does this provision or condition also apply to referral bonuses? And the answer was it can. Depends on how you structure that referral bonus. Is it just a, hey, here's a gift for sending this person in to interview? Or does the person need to be employed 3 months and you still need to be here? Are there conditions? Basically, conditions are the equivalent of then earning it when you meet those conditions. So now it's not just a gift, it becomes an earned wage.
Right, it's part of the compensation system at that point, right?
And again, another reason why it needs to go into overtime when it's not just a gift, because now it's part of the regular earned wage. This slide in particular is continuation, but the focus of it is really about clawbacks, how, some people might get structured in Wisconsin, for example. You can totally structure a sign-in bonus by saying, look, I'm going to give you this within a week of hire. If you leave within the first 3 months, you owe it back to us. Illinois, you cannot do that. There's also practical considerations like good luck collecting it. You're going to have a bunch of small claims actions, right? Trying to get your $300 back and garnishing somebody else's minimum wage paycheck. Sounds fun. But aside from that, you can do it. We had, talking about the class action theme, there's a firm in Milwaukee that focuses just on these type of class actions. They like to find bonuses that aren't included in the regular rate. They have a template class action pleading they like to file in federal court. And you can pull them up, they're all the same. Like your client gets hit with one of them. I had a client hit with one of them, pulled them up, is the same as the other one they had in court. Same, just, it's a template. They're making a whole living out of this, just on these type of cases. Because it was in Wisconsin, this case was unique because their class representative had such a bonus, but she left before her 6 months was up. So she owed us money. So she had to go home. And the case was dropped. They couldn't find a representative that could adequately represent their class. But in Illinois, that case would have stayed in court. She wouldn't have been able to owe the money back. The clawback provision would have been unlawful.
Yeah, on the referral bonuses, that's a perk. It's not a bad one to have. But from a recruitment standpoint, it's positive because I think the finding is in most cases, if you have current employees who are willing to refer somebody, they're basically willing to vouch for that person. Mm-hmm. So the hope is they're not sending a clown your way. And that helps to build a better team environment. That helps to also lead to more quality candidates. And certainly it's usually less expensive than a third-party recruiter because those fees are just enormous.
You have a question? Payroll taxes and de minimis. If you are paying someone cash compensation, you have to start with the presumption that it's taxable. If you're going to go the de minimis route, I would advise you to seek counsel first before you rely on that. There are certain things that are de minimis, and we're going to talk about tax implications of some of these other more complicated bonuses in the next few slides, but generally you start with the presumption that it's taxable unless you can find an exception. The IRS wants its money.
It's another good segue.
I know, it's like we planted these people. All right, forgivable loans. This I see happen sometimes with a lot of highly compensated people working in areas where you're giving out real big signing bonuses. It happens with physicians sometimes, happens with people moving to relocating areas that they're relocating to. You're giving out 6-figure loans sometimes. I know it's crazy, right? Where's that job? Let me apply. But this happens. And so just wanted to mention this as something that's out there regardless of the amount. How you do it and structure it as a loan is just a different type of way in terms of a signing bonus. It's not something you necessarily want to mess with until you get into the higher amounts. But the idea being, that this is something that can be used as an alternative. It's good for highly compensated people, executives, people you're relocating, like I said, because you don't get taxed when you receive the principal amount. You get taxed on the debt forgiveness. So it's a way to see sneaky with the taxes. That's what you got to do, is know the rules. So you don't get taxed on that big lump sum and you can defer it another years because you're not really earning it. And then if they leave earlier, it also serves retention because if they leave earlier, it's a loan. You have the loan documents that they have to repay the proceeds. And they're collectible because these are high income positions usually. Yes?
Can I just ask you a question on the flip side of attendance bonuses or perfect attendance bonuses? We've actually taken them
Um,
Yeah.
Do I need to repeat that anyways, just on the
Yeah, I
mic for the
think so.
recording?
Yes. thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna do my best to rephrase your question, ma'am. The question was, in terms of attendance bonuses and that their company had taken them away because people working remotely were working through illness, et cetera, and it became a non-issue. Everybody was getting them, I assume. You know,
Perfect attendance at the end of the year, 12/31.
perfect attendance at the end of the year. There was nothing, not the concern. The concern wasn't there, I suppose. And that's
Just everybody had perfect attendance. 'Cause
right. Everybody had perfect attendance, so it becomes a non-issue. Everybody's getting basically
Right.
the same bonus. And that's another thing with know your audience. Right? So in that case, the attendance bonus isn't something that's going to motivate behavior you care about anymore. So being able to reevaluate and change those type of bonuses and look at, like you exactly said, it's not rewarding any specific behavior anymore. It's just there. Let's redirect this money to use it towards it as more of an incentive. Oh, Bev, you alluded to this a bit.
Did I? Okay, well, so there are some employers out there that are starting to have sort of lottery drawings to kind of keep everybody engaged with the business, the operations, with their team. So the question has been, and I think we heard a little bit about this earlier too, is, how does that work then? Are we running into sort of a problem if we start advertising to our, 100 employees, hey, there's going to be a lottery, you guys should see what's going to happen, but you're going to have to attend, I don't know, a town hall meeting or something at work in order to be eligible for it. Then what do you do? It's no longer a gift, right? Necessarily, if you are going to have strings attached to it. Again, if it's the extra, you can only be eligible if you do show up in person for that meeting at the business. And then it's taxed now, so Rebecca's going to jump in here for me. But
And
yeah.
I'm sorry, I was referring to how you were saying be fair and how you're offering it. I didn't. Sorry, I'm confusing
That's
in
all
my
right.
in my reference, but it's again a thing you want to look at who you're offering. And I see some confused looks. Think about it. It's like offering a signing bonus, but to one person, right? You're going to offer $1,000 to someone that's still employed on December 31st, right? Everybody there is going to get in this lottery. Do we need to make certain local rules and regulations are followed? Gambling restrictions, things like that. And it depends on the amounts involved, where you're at, the localities. So it is something people are doing. Again, know your audience. This doesn't motivate everyone, but it is a tactic we're seeing a lot of companies invest in. Question becomes, what happens when everybody but one person loses the lottery? And it was like on January 1. It's like, I don't know if any of you buy lottery. I don't buy lottery tickets anymore because then I just start to fantasize about winning, and then I get really ticked off when I lose because my dreams are never coming true. So
Rebecca, this is so sad.
I
Okay.
know, you can't be like me. But no, it is a good tactic that it works with the right audience. The next one is a sample for you to take home, retention bonus. I don't
That's
know
okay.
why. I
So
should print it out bigger
that's all right.
slides.
So
I'm like
what
craning
what
my
I
neck
think
like.
is key here is that it sets out specific terms. How that retention bonus is going to be earned. What are the consequences if those conditions are not met? What happens when the employment relationship terminates? You'd be surprised how many of these we see where there's an offer letter to an employee and now a demand because they're at the end of their employment, where what's covering whatever that retention bonus was, it's 3 lines long, and it doesn't really define, well, what does it mean? What was for cause? What was voluntary? Does it only matter if I'm going to a competitor? Right? Those sort of questions.
The more conditions, the more things to fight over.
True, but clarity also goes a long way, right?
Yes.
So a lot of that just depends on what the circumstances are for your typical employment relationships.
And the amounts at stake,
Sure.
what you're offering,
Yeah.
like, is it something people are gonna fight over? What are you offering here? Also, and what you're trying to motivate. The condition
Yes.
should be tied to behavior you're trying to motivate and address with the incentive. But, you know, again, this kind of thing is state specific. In Wisconsin, it would not need to be so complex because forfeitures are allowed. So you could put different provisions in, depending on what state you're in, and wage and hour laws in that state. You could be more aggressive, I guess, with your forfeitures, if that was your goal. Do you have a question? No. Oh, just seeing
ahead.
things.
So another fantastic segue. I mean, literally in my notes was, if you're in the union context, yeah. So the question was, if we need to hire, for example, a lot of truck drivers, you know, those are really hot demand right now.
Yes, I feel for you.
Yeah, right. You know, and these truck drivers are all, their relationship is governed by a union collective bargaining agreement. And the expiration isn't for another couple of years. What can I do? So my answer to that is, first of all, the union will almost never say no to more money, okay? So it is possible to negotiate memorandum of understanding with them, short and sweet. This is what the company intends to do. This is how much we expect to do it. You know, you're gonna have to keep it uniform across the board. It's either a percentage or an amount. And then it's going to be, most importantly for you, that this is not to be used as precedent going forward, right? That's really key when you are negotiating that sort of thing. For a union to fight you wanting to give signing bonuses and retention bonuses would be insane. Stranger things have happened, but in most cases that's not going to be an issue as long as they're satisfied with those very simple terms.
Another idea when you're thinking about whether or not you want to design or invest in a retention bonus is perhaps it would be altered by your busy season, right? So this policy in particular has people employed with the company through December 31st, through the end of the year, regardless of hire date. But, you know, I have a client that's a florist. Their busiest time is February 14th. So maybe they want to do first quarter. Or maybe, you know, you sell potato chips and your busiest season is the Super Bowl. So it just depends on your industry. You could also think of tailoring that to address your busiest needs. Okay. A lot of these next slides, especially when they come to complex benefit issues, could be whole sessions by themselves, and we're not going to go into that other than for you to know, we're not going to go into that detail. Plus, trust me, you'd fall asleep. Deferred compensation, just to know that there are all these creative plans you can put in place that are attracting especially high-level executives or higher compensated individuals who want to defer income. And especially if income taxes are about to go up next year, a lot of people are already looking at ways to deal with that. It's a series of complex rules, but basically just the IRS wants to get involved and make sure you file certain rules when you want to defer income and pay taxes along with the associated taxes on it to subsequent years. But there are a lot of creative ways you can structure that, and they can be tied to retention. It takes a bit to invest and set up the plan, but once you do that, it is a huge retention tool, especially for your C-suite or other, you know, your highly paid salespeople, other things like that. It's a great tool. And this is stuff above and beyond, you know, 401k limits, et cetera. You can push income to subsequent years and kind of control it. You can also do things that are unfunded. So basically you're pushing this money, but you're not investing in a trust. It's just a ledger on your books of what you might owe people if they become vested in it over time. You can be really creative with this stuff.
Flexible schedules, I mean, it's kind of it's a step before we go to the remote work issue, right? Flexible schedules are ideal.
Or a step back.
Or a step back. It's another way to look at it. That is another way to look at it, Rebecca. Okay. If you are dealing with a workforce where it is going to be desirable to have them back into the office more often than not, then maybe look at the flexible schedule option. Maybe really look, you know, what's the core time I really need this person here? Can I possibly allow them Because again, remember, we're dealing with employee expectations right now and recruitment. Can I allow them to, maybe come in later on certain days and leave earlier on other days? To give them the flexibility they need because of one reason or another that they've expressed. Maybe you're not even gonna require them to express it, but offer that as a possibility. I think the trick with that, though, is if you have somebody who's working for you whose job is not to produce a deliverable, right? Something concrete for you to see. Something like a lawyer like me where I gotta tell them every week how many hours I've been working, that sort of thing, that becomes tricky. You're gonna have to monitor it. Your supervisors are gonna have to monitor that. And of course, the difficulty with that is if you don't enforce every time, you're gonna run into problems down the road, right? We all know that. But it is something, of course, to be aware of as a possibility if we're not going to even be able to look at the remote work option.
And along with that, with remote work and flexibility, the saying, there's an app for that. There's a ton of developing software out there, and I have some clients using it where it's job boards, project lists, to-do lists, and ways to monitor and collaborate and track what's being done, what we we have to submit records of our time for everything worked. So you can do things and have employees do certain requirements, but it does take monitoring. In the beginning of the pandemic, there was obviously a shift, and we all had to do this, in a hurry. And then I had some clients where, I'm sure all of you have been in that boat on occasion where you feel like someone's just really taken advantage of the extra time off or the flexibility or not really putting in the effort. And you really need that way to be able to verify what have they done. I mean, you can't submit the same projects completed every week, right? And I had one client in particular who was convinced the employee had another job. And I'm like, what? That's crazy, right? Who has another job? Then I saw this Times article about how it was a big trend. She's laughing at me. She knows. She's like, you're a sucker. See this Times article, and it's a trend, and people, because you can get so much more work done in the day, have time for a whole second job. I mean, I'm exhausted, but whatever. More power to them, I guess. But are they getting the work done? This guy wasn't getting the work done, and so then we did some sleuthing, investigating. Sure enough, he had a big job, like a second big job, which was explaining. He was even quoted in an article that we found in his role at that job. So he got fired. But the point is you need to monitor. And in that case, they hadn't been monitoring, right? He had excuses for why he wasn't turning in his sheets and why certain things weren't getting done and all these excuses. But you do have a right and obligation, and it's reasonable to make people account. It's have them give something back in exchange for the trust to work remotely or be
that really highlights the employer's struggle with flexibility, right? Is how are we sure they're doing what we need them to do and what we're paying them to do? And unfortunately, that onus of monitoring then falls on the company and the supervisors in a much greater way than it used to be.
One thing I want to mention before we go on is that we didn't address with remote work, and this category reminds me, is the be mindful of developing local state mandates. This is a reference to the Chicago Fair Work Week ordinance and shift notices and schedules, but you should also, especially with hiring for remote positions, be mindful of state laws, because you may see some ads out there now that I say this, and I tell you to watch for it, where it says, we're hiring, people can work remotely except for Colorado people, right? You see that? You know why that's there? Because in Colorado, you have to publish the salary range for the position. People don't want to publish that. So they're like, okay, anybody can work remote except for you Colorado people, we don't want you. We're not publishing our salary data. So you have to think about that as well when you're advertising remote and creative work situations. Well, yeah, that's challenges too. All right, restrictive covenants. We have a duplicate of slides here, so.
Do we?
Yay.
So this
Bonus.
has to be the most unpopular incentive I think that an employer would want to put out there, because you usually have your reasons for requiring employees to sign these restrictive covenant agreements, but I suppose it's an option. I haven't seen employers willing to bend on this except when, things are going sour and we're at the end of the relationship. But to begin with, what would be the purpose of this? I don't know, except for somebody coming to you and saying that, I'm thinking about leaving. I may not leave, I may stay longer, but I want you to relax it, right? It's really the only instance I can see it is where someone will say, I know you need me to finish this project. I know we have goals for the end of the year. I'm willing to stay on, but I need you to relax the terms on this.
Or in the hiring process, do you need me to sign? I don't
Right.
feel comfortable signing this non-compete agreement. Or, and the thing is what you have to think about is, what do we really need here, right? Because if you're going to be in a position later where you're arguing someone is key and they're threatening your business by going to work for a competitor, one of the elements you have to establish in that litigation is that you've taken reasonable steps to protect your business interest. So you have to tread carefully when you're deciding what to relax. But if you're in that category where you've been kind of overly generous with having people sign non-competes, or you haven't really invested in the language to tailor them narrowly like you should, in addition to the new laws in Illinois and everything going on and pending changes, now's the time to look and make sure they're as narrowly crafted as possible, because it's also a hiring incentive. Yes?
My question is just with regard to the Illinois youth law and restrictive covenant. If you have one in place, did it just end, or are people able to fulfill?
The question was in regard to the Illinois restrictive covenant law, and if you have one in place, does it end or is it allowed to continue?
It is allowed to continue. The new law does not go into effect until January of 2022, and it does not affect existing agreements.
Again, another reason why you want to think before you rewrite them, right? Sorry, I'm a little feisty over here.
So let's shift a little to background checks, because that is part of the recruitment process. I've been hearing, I know my colleagues have been hearing, that background screening, including drug testing, is taking a lot longer. All right, so that's really starting to muck things up. Some employers are wondering, can we revise some of our screening programs from, for now, temporarily for hire, for example, waiving criminal background checks and that sort of thing.
Oh, that's okay. I thought it was my phone.
Oh, I know. Like, what's happening? Can you move to the next slide unless you want to add something real quick? But for some,
because it's the same thing.
For some who are in industries like energy, right, finance, healthcare, transportation, you don't really have a choice. You're stuck doing it. Unfortunately, we're just going to have to wait for those sources to be able to catch up to speed. But then there are the others who also have contractual obligations to whoever their clients are, whoever they're servicing, that also require those sort of screenings. But what about the rest of you? The one thing to keep in mind is, obviously, there's the practical end. You still need to know who you're hiring, right? But also, legally, employers have a duty not to engage in negligent hiring. It's an actual claim. It's a common law claim, which occurs when an employer fails to act reasonably to make sure that who they hire will not likely subsequently harm somebody else, right? Negligent hiring is still a duty that exists regardless of all of it. So once a candidate is hired, employers are obviously responsible for supervising those individuals and making sure that they don't bring any harm to the organization or to other people. One of the risks that you have to consider also, if you're going to temporarily waive any of these requirements, something like a criminal background check, is that it opens you up to claims of discriminatory hiring practices down the road when you re-implement, right? Because Title VII requires that if you're going to go through a certain hiring practice, you're doing so because there is a legitimate business-related reason for it. So if you start to waive it temporarily and then you reinstitute it, there is a strong argument it really wasn't that necessary. So something to consider, as much as I know as inconvenient as those delays are right now, there is a risk to waive. Yep.
Is there any risk in changing from being full agreement testing to doing something
Less comprehensive Check. The question was, is there a risk to doing something less than full fingerprinting or changing your method of background check?
So my thought on that is the same. If it's going to be a requirement that is only temporarily waived, just full change, I have less of a problem with that, way less. Yeah.
And again, depending on the restrictions and whether you would do it, why you were doing that in the first place. You know,
Right.
what. Right.
Oh, wow. All right, the comment was that right now it takes the FBI 30 to 45 days to get back to you. So I understand that, yeah.
Drug tests and screening.
This is one where my notes say, it's the same analysis.
Yeah, it is, right?
It is.
But one thing I want to point out is, I think this is an area with all of these, again, with the same analysis, you know, I'm suggesting restrictive covenants, background checks, like, are you the type of business that has been kind of, you know, let's just do it, let's go for it, erring on the side of overly broad, with an overly broad net, lumping everyone in? This is kind of when you want to reevaluate background or drug testing as well. You know, alcohol and cannabis, unless you're testing for present use, there's really no point in dealing with that because it's lawful conduct outside of work, at least in Illinois. And another thing is that a lot of companies are dropping some of the drug testing requirements for certain positions that are not safety sensitive because it hasn't proven to be a reliable indicator of preventing on-the-job use. In other words, people know, right? They know to, as my 26-year-old son calls it, a high holiday, to do that so that you can pass your, I mean, people know to do that. So it's not a great indicator of detecting subsequent use on the job.
Right, so that said, obviously, safety sensitive positions, there's no turning back from that. You don't want that kind of liability on you. They don't want that sort of danger out there, so that's something that I think we're stuck with. But truncating the screening process, you know, may not provide employers with a sort of benefit that the organization may need long term. So let's just talk about a potential gap filler. It's an idea I'm throwing out there, we can talk about it, is why not, if you have the 30 to 45 day period, for example, wait time, reserve the right upon hiring to conduct the screening post-employment, right? Keeping in mind, though, that you're still going to have to comply with the Fair Credit Reporting Act requirements, right? You're going to give them the notice even though they're employed. I'm going to say to you, this is what we're going to do. This is what we reserved a right to do when we hired you. We're going to go through that. And the same thing on the other end. If you get bad information, you still have to give them the notice under the FCRA, right? Give them a copy of the report. Give them a copy of whatever else you have found out. But that's a potential gap filler, I think.
Gap filler.
Gap filler is just my gap filling, yeah. Yes, post-employment screening. Reserving the right to do it upon hire. So something I would put
It
into
is
the
because
offer letter.
I think gap filling is the important aspect too, because it's practically speaking, it's a harder spot to be in when you get an adverse result when the person's already in the job, as I'm sure many of you know, because, well, actually, no, I'm sure none of your managers hire people before all the testing is done. Never happens. So you wouldn't know what that's like. But other businesses probably would tell you that it's a pain when that stuff is to deal with later when someone's already in the position. It's much harder. So, but it addresses a temporary situation without giving it up completely.
So the question is if we would put that reservation on a separate page with the other, in addition to the other documents in the employment process. It can't hurt. You know what? I think it's a good idea actually, because you would want to, similar to a pre-employment Fair Credit Reporting Act notice, you would want to put that separately. It's a better practice if you can do it.
Okay, now we'll go through some of these. There's more on the slide than we need to talk about, and that's because you're going to get to take that slide home, right, with the laundry listing. But the idea of these next few slides are to give you some creative things that may or may not fit your business. You may be like, who the heck is offering these kind of things, right? Well, someone is, and that someone may be competing with the same labor pool as you, so you want to at least know what's out there and some possible issues to address if you're implementing. One of my favorites on this slide in particular is pet insurance. Everybody after COVID's got a dog now, right? So, and the last bullet is that if it's 100% employee paid and you're just, as the employer, making it available and administering, getting a better group rate than they could get on their own, then that's not an ERISA benefit. The maintenance is relatively low. So it's an easy option to implement and advertise. And it's like, oh, look at, they care about my interests. Again, know your audience. Are they going to be asking you about pet insurance or attracted to that? Some other ideas. Benefits for part-timers. Part-timers are a huge demand in certain positions. And so should you structure that offering a type of vacation? Some of you already do, I know. 401k plan, there have been certain changes to make that even more inclusive, which already kind of included part-timers as well. But prorated vacation, paid holidays, is unlimited PTO. I do a whole separate webinar on the challenges of the concept of unlimited PTO, but it's not a new one. It's been around a bit, and is that something that might be a helpful tool in recruiting or something that your employees look at? A lot of people can stress over that balance on their pay stubs. I'm sure those of you who deal with payroll know, like, this is wrong, or why'd you dock me for that 0.5? No, that doesn't happen either, she said, never. Employee well-being, family-focused benefits. This one is huge because the biggest, I shouldn't say the biggest, right? Everybody was affected in different ways and to different extents, but a large group of affected people during the pandemic are employees with children, young children. And trying to recognize that challenge that keeps those people from being at your workplace and being able to be productive is important. And there are ways you can do that short of offering a full-site daycare on your facility, right? Which we can't all do. There are certain services out there, backup childcare services. You can have a kid, you have certain requirements, the employee signs up. They have certain things where they can participate in the program for up to a certain amount of time. The facility leaves certain room for those individuals for if something comes up. You can have childcare referral services, expense subsidies, EAP, financial well-being initiatives, all kinds of stuff that you can be creative with. A lot of companies are looking at this too, because one thing you have to keep in mind in knowing your audience is that the younger generation doesn't want just cash. As much as I, as a lawyer, would say, just give them cash, it's easier, tax it and we'll deal with it, give them a bonus and don't mess with all this. They don't want it. They don't care if it's taxable. They'd rather have that allowance for lunch. They want you to tell them how to spend their money, I guess. Different than me, but it's a trend. And so these things are evolving, even though there may not be any tax benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that in case any of you are wondering, is there any real context for this? We're saying that some employers are doing these sort of things. Just a small bit of statistics here. International Foundation of Employee Benefit Plans, it's a big benefit association. They had a survey earlier this year in May. They surveyed 293 U.S. employers. The question was regarding benefit charges that they have made since March of 2020 when the pandemic first hit. During the pandemic, 23% of them added virtual mental health therapy sessions as a benefit. Of those that added virtual counseling, almost all have either made it a permanent change, 71%, or are considering making it permanent. They also added flexibility for caregiving, and notably not necessarily just for child care, but even elder care, because those things that's really starting to matter to a lot of the workforce. Same thing, nearly half, 48% of the respondents offered the flexible working hours to accommodate employees' child care or elder care needs. In our, how many? 28% are considering that change to be permanent. And then, of course, as we had already talked about, changes in vacation and paid time off policies. There are changes that were made to carryover options, something to think about for vacation days or PTO, allowing employees more options to actually utilize that paid time off during a year, so that almost 1/4 of those employers plan to make that a permanent change. Anyway, just
You know, and some of these
background.
benefits are a consequence of, you can't make anyone happy, right? So people want remote work, but then they complain they don't get the snacks and the pops, and they got to get their own paper and their office supplies, right? They got a whole burden of maintaining their own office. Shock. I say this laughingly because for those of you who work with me, and know I've been working remotely for years, way before it was trendy, and there's definitely some downsides to it. But that's why, for example, if you have a stocked cafeteria with pop and stuff, that's a de minimis. Lady mentioned de minimis earlier. It's a de minimis benefit. It's not a taxable event. But if you're handing out $50 a week to employees to buy their own snacks, or $25 a week, that's going to be more of a taxable event, right? Because now it's not a necessary job expense. But depending on your work environment, if everybody's remote, you don't have the option to just stock the lunchroom anymore. And you want to still be able to do those kind of things. Another big thing, again, this is know your audience, and people are doing these things. Tuition assistance. There are a crazy amount of ways you can try to help people with their student loans. You can do it certain tax advantageous ways. You can do it through a 401k, profit sharing contribution, which I really like if people understand that, because you can then vest the payment, just like you do with maybe your profit sharing money, so that can help with retention, right? It's gonna take you 3 years to be vested in every contribution, et cetera, whatever you wanna do. But there are a lot of great ways, and again, it goes with knowing your audience. If you're competing with, geriatric millennials, as the term my new phrase I like, oxymoron, I think it is. That's a big concern, knowing what people care about. Infertility treatments, egg freezing. These are things that a lot of benefit plans don't cover, and don't cover well. And people need them, and they're looking for them and asking for them. And there are ways to do these. If you do them taxable, you still have to watch out for ACA implications, because you can't have health plans that set annual limits. You have to do it integrated. And it can be a little bit more complex, but it can be done. And if you have that huge demand and you're recruiting for talent that cares about that, that's a benefit that can definitely set you apart from others and be an effective recruiting tool. Again, I mentioned some other things about child care assistance on the other slide. These are just,
Well,
go into this one a bit?
sure, I will, just to, I guess, bring the point home, which all of you probably already know, but again, because everything has shifted, a lot of the interviewing process for employers has changed to virtual interviewing. Boy, train your hiring managers on how to conduct a virtual interview. It's different. I'm telling you firsthand, it's different. There's a lot to consider as far, and usually you'd have to consider making sure you train that hiring manager on what to say, what not to say. But virtually, I think it's important too. It's the sort of, what are the expectations? How do we want to present ourselves, even if it's virtually? Do we want to see your cat walking, behind you on the screen? That
I
sort
had
of
a lady
thing.
doing that in court, like a Zoom court thing, just like walking behind her head and on her couch.
Yeah. Or do you want to make sure that that's something that's uniform? And again, it's going to bring up the questions of how is your organization responded to the pandemic? Negotiate with candidates on their compensation. This is important because compensation still matters. It still matters. It's not everything, and we're seeing a lot of applicants looking at it holistically, but the dollar bill still speaks. Sometimes, especially now, when we are dealing with these recruitment obstacles, there is a possibility of maybe phasing in salary increases, so that I'm not going to pay you $1,000 starting today, but I may be able to pay you $1,000 within 6 months or 12 months, right? That's usually more palatable for finance And it's also just, it's something where if it's in writing and you're able to provide that to an applicant, it's something that's going to get them in the door. That's the hope.
Right. The other thing to think about when you're, the other perks I mentioned earlier, where I said even if they're taxable, one other benefit to that is thinking of the annual increase dilemma. And if these other cash benefits or cash equivalents are given out, that doesn't get factored into the percentage increase, right? So that's another reason to offer some creative perks that wouldn't tie you to additional increased compensation. One thing is, we've mentioned throughout, be fair, be consistent, think about what you're doing. What you don't want to do is implement these benefits and then forget the people that came in, right? I'm starting a hiring bonus next week. Well, what about the people that were hired last month? So you gotta think about, it's all marketing, right? HR has become more and more marketing, internal marketing.
Absolutely.
So you have to think about those considerations when you're rolling out perks. Okay. Then I think we already addressed this. If you had anything you wanted to talk.
We did. So obviously if we're talking about terms of compensation or benefits, there's a duty to bargain with any union that is representing any portion of your workforce. That's easy. I did want to add just a couple more things. We talked a lot about short-term incentives, short-term, sort of awards or gifts to get people in the door. Retention-wise, though, I do think it's worth discussing very quickly. And you guys would probably say, well, we already know this. We're the HR professionals. I know, but this is just an observation from clients, and then my own observations. I can't say it enough every time we do the trainings. People do not leave companies. They leave managers.
Yes.
Right? They leave that. So in this time of where there, such significant changes, almost every week, right? Even with the vaccinations and everything they're hearing, let's be sure that our supervisors are equipped to properly and consistently communicate with their teams. That's huge for retention in my book, because if you can't kill the anxiety and the confusion, I think you're dead in the water, and you will start to see more and more turnover.
A funny tie into that is that one of the leading traits people are looking for now in interviewing candidates is how they handle change. So.
Yeah. Anyway, just an observation. It seems important. I think also the onboarding and orientation process is something that many of us will fall right into as employers, where it's just, we've always done it this way. This is it. We give them the forms, we tell them this, we show them the PowerPoint slide, we're done. And not everyone's like that, but there are a lot of employers out there like that. It's a different time, again, right?
Yes.
You have people starting out virtually, that sort of bringing them into the full process probably requires some reevaluation. And
So if there's one theme, it's time to reevaluate how you're, doing onboarding, recruiting, exit interviews, and all of that sort, and supervisor reviews, evaluations. There's our glamour shots.
There you go.
Haunts me after every presentation.
It's horrible.
But if any of you have questions, we'll be here for a bit.
All right. Thank you, everyone.